Hey guys, just wanted to hop in at the top of the episode to let you know that the audio is going to be a little rough for this one. I messed up the recording on my end and I tried to salvage it the best that I could, and I still think the episode turned out pretty great, but I just want to let you know that it's not always going to sound like that. And I truly did do my best to make it as listenable as possible. Okay, enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to the Complicated Women Podcast, a show dedicated to discussing the complex women of Dimension 20. I am your host, Andrew, and joining me today is extra special guest, fellow Galir hater, and a Crown of Candy supremacist, Squid! Welcome, Squid.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here.
I am so happy to have you. How are you doing on this fine spring afternoon?
I'm doing well. It's actually raining a lot where I am, so that could be better. But besides that,
Yeah, it rained yesterday here in Ohio, and now I'm really hot because it's so humid because we had a thunderstorm yesterday.
I remember those Ohio summers. This is familiar.
Yeah, but hey, we don't get like massive snowstorms, and we don't get earthquakes or hurricanes really. So you gotta take what you can get, you know.
Trade-offs.
Let's before we get into our main discussion about the character of the day, I want to know a little bit about how you got into Dimension 20 in the first place. Like, what's your the first season you watched, or the first live season you watched?
So the first thing I watched was Fantasy High. We started at the beginning, and I was very lucky in that I finished Fantasy High right around when sophomore year was coming out. But I got into Dimension 20 because I was playing D&D and I had purposely made a deeply bad rogue character. And my DM came to me after a session one day. It was like, you know what? I think you'd really like how Allie Beardsley plays. So
Yeah. Well, and we talk about the purposefully unoptimizing your character, and then going from Fantasy High directly into sophomore year, right? With Fabian.
Right.
I haven't watched sophomore year in a really long time, so I don't remember the specifics.
But basically, Lou really being like, I'm going to dedicate myself to this roleplay, even to the detriment of his character.
Yeah. That's God. The Intrepid heroes are all so good at storytelling, and we'll get into this obviously, especially with today's character, because I think there's a lot of sacrifice for the sake of storytelling in Dimension 20 that is not something that happens in home games, and I think when people see that in Dimension 20, it rubs up against them in a little bit of a weird way, because they're like, well, that's not how I would play that. It's like, well, you're also not making a television show, so.
Yep. Definitely. We've talked about this before. The enjoyment of watching Dimension 20 seriously and criticizing it like it's a piece of art, because it is. It's a packaged television show. It's not a home game. They do this for money.
Do you have? I mentioned sort of as a joke that we're both a Crown of Candy supremacists, which I believe is something that originated on Twitter as a bad thing. But what are there any other? We don't have to put them in order necessarily, but do you have like other seasons that are in your top 3?
So, the funniest part of that is that A Crown of Candy isn't even my favorite season. It's not even my favorite Intrepid Heroes season.
Wow.
So that's my little secret. My favorite.
Yeah, you heard it here first. We're getting the exclusive interviews here on the Complicated Women Podcast.
My favorite Dimension 20 season is probably Mice and Murder, and then A Court of Fame Flowers, and it's difficult. I I haven't even finished Burrow's End, but I really like it. I think though I'd choose my third as the 7. I really, really liked the 7.
Yeah. I think the 7's probably up there for me too. And I know you're only on you haven't like caught up yet. You're like in the process of catching up with junior year, and who knows, they might totally flop the finale like they did with the Crown of Candy. But I think junior year might honestly be taking that top spot for me.
Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun catching up. It's I had a hard start because I find D&D battle deeply boring, and so the first 2 episodes just being battle, I was like, well, I'm not having fun. I don't think I'm going to keep watching. But my friends were like, Lydia, you need to get over that, and I said, all right, I guess.
The way I will not shut up about how bad I think the first episode of junior year is. It's not okay. It's not that I don't understand the joke of it being completely out of context. It's just that it's frustrating for me to watch. You know?
In media res is a good place to start, but it makes it difficult with when you're playing D&D. Well, really, when you're playing any TTRPG, if you just start in the middle of combat, because combat, if you aren't like invested in what's happening yet, is boring. It's boring to watch.
That's why I was rewatching A Crown of Candy to prepare for this episode, and I really just sped through those combat episodes. I was like, okay, we got the opening part where they're kind of doing setup, and then the end after the fight is over, and I guess I'll just I'll put this on like double speed and do something else while it's playing in the background. Do I really need to listen to 5 minutes of them figuring out how many dice to roll for this one attack? Not really. I mean, especially if we're just thinking about like character and role playing.
Yeah. Yeah, I could talk forever about A Crown of Candy and what systems might have been better to play it in. But this is not what that podcast is about.
Right, this is the Complicated Women podcast. We're talking about the complicated women. And, right. In that spirit, I think it is time for us to move on, not into the main bulk of our discussion, but to the segment that everyone knows and loves, Woman of the Week. It's the segment where we each get a brief yet unspecified amount of time to explain why whoever we picked is our personal Woman of the Week. I'll start us off. My Woman of the Week this week is Tashi Duncan, aka Zendaya from the movie Challengers.
Oh.
When I talk about complicated women, I'm talking about Tashi Duncan. She is so fucked up and mean, but in the best way. She is first and foremost a Fujoshi. When she makes those 2 boys kiss and then lean back on the bed, I said, I know that's right. I feel you, sister. And also the movie's just really good. Like if you obviously, but to the audience at home as well, if you haven't seen Challengers yet and you have the chance to go see it in theaters, I would highly recommend it. The score in that movie is amazing, and I can't imagine that a couple of those music drops will hit the same at home versus in the theater, but it's still amazing any way you see it. That is why I think Tashi Duncan, aka Zendaya's character in Challengers, is my Woman of the Week.
I need to see it. I need to go watch it. Oh,
so good.
My Woman of the Week, and I thought so hard after you told me. I was like, well, I can't do her. I have to find another woman, but I couldn't. My Woman of the Week is Kipper-Lily Copperkettle.
Say that. I'm 100% on board with this.
Oh boy, I'm not caught up in junior year. The reason I'm getting caught up is because I've gotten so into Kipper-Lily that it is embarrassing that I don't actually know, like, besides being told by my friends, what is happening in the episode. Like, at some point I have to get, and I've had like 4 tweets take off about her, and I don't actually watch the show. I'm caught up. I haven't actually seen the episode. It's embarrassing.
It's just the fundamental belief that a high schooler cannot do anything wrong.
Yes, not not only a high schooler, women are allowed to do whatever they want. So she's a high schooler and she's a girl. It's fine. What does it matter? It's fine.
Who cares? Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yeah. We're going to do, spoiler alert, we're going to do an episode about Kimberly once the season is unwrapping. So, but yeah, so I won't spoil any of my specific thoughts and takes on Kimberly other than to say that I am obsessed with her. And I really hope that they don't kill her in Wednesday's episode. Um,
We can only hope. God, we can only hope.
I mean, I feel like I've talked about this on Twitter maybe, but I really hope we don't get another Daughters of the Crown situation with Never After, where it's just like, these are bad guys, we're gonna dead.
Yeah. Oh, this is not her episode, but the things I could say about Snow White. Um, I'm deeply, deeply hopeful because that they will realize, like, oh, these are people being manipulated who are just trying their best. But who could say?
Who's to say? Listen, okay. Well, we're actually going to cut that conversation off there because I was going to say something that I actually had bullet pointed to talk about later because I think it applies to Saccharina as well. But let's move on into the main topic of today's episode. You know her. I certainly love her. That is Queen Saccharina of House Frostwhip, first of her name, sovereign ruler of Candia and the Sugarlands, Witch Queen of the Dairy Sea, Storm Captain of the Frosted Fleet, the Sunday Sorceress, High Priestess of the Sweetening Path, Archmage of La Sucrosia, and Enemy of the Faith.
Woo!
God, I fucking love. Rewatching, I forgot that Enemy of the Faith is one of her titles, and when it hit, when she's first introduced in episode 12, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure.
God damn! No wonder why I love this bitch. Like, she's so awesome.
Yeah, it is. All of her titles are great. I love every single one of her titles. I wish that they had just dissected where she got each one from, because when it's like Amithar or the twins, you know where they got their titles from.
Right.
But like her, she has all the stuff, and we don't even like really find out much about Lost Sucrosia. Tell me more.
Right, exactly. And this is one of the things, I was rewatching the Adventuring Parties, and one of the things Brennan says about the episode where they do delve into her backstory, he was like, yeah, there's no one really for Saccharina to talk to about her backstory. And so him and Emily both felt like they needed to have a moment where it was like undeniable, like this is where she is coming from. And I think it's so unfortunate that we don't get more of that in the season, because I would love nothing more than to just see different vignettes of Saccharina throughout her life. Like, she drowned. She like summons a hurricane or something and drowns all the nuns in milk.
Mm-hmm.
That's fucking awesome, but you wouldn't know about that if you didn't watch the Adventuring Party.
Yeah. I think, like, especially, okay. So the thing about Saccharina is that the way that she's introduced makes it so difficult for her, because there is not a universe where that character is introduced and it's like a great thing.
Right. It's the irony of Emily playing both Saccharina and Jet. The only way for Saccharina to ever be introduced is after Jet's death.
Mm-hmm.
Which, is ironic in itself that Saccharina finally meets this family that she's been wanting to meet for her entire life, only for them to be in the worst possible position to meet her. And I think that's one of the things that makes her character so fascinating and like tickles my brain is the mutual like disconnected nature of her relationship with the rocks.
Yeah. And it also is difficult because Jet is the person I think that would have loved her the most. I think even if Ruby had died, if they swapped it up and Ruby dies and we clone Emily and Saccharina gets to be there too.
Right.
I still think that Jet would have reacted to it much differently than Ruby did. And I also love Ruby. That's also a complicated woman. But definitely her reaction to Saccharina was like deeply unfair and difficult to work with.
Yeah. But I mean, Siobhan says it in one of the adventuring parties that Ruby is, or that Saccharina is a, like, this convenient vessel for Ruby to take out all of her, like, impotent rage on. And, you know, for no reason, really. But also, it kind of makes sense that Ruby would have this reaction to Saccharina. Just from, like, if you look at what Saccharina represents, right? She is literally the living embodiment of this mistake that Amathar made. And that mistake, from Ruby's perspective at least, is the thing that leads directly to Jet's death. Like, you can draw a straight line between Catherine B and Amathar getting married and Saccharina's birth to the death of Jet and Dulcington. And then
It's like, I mean, if you think about it, like, if they had killed Amathar and Security Road, then the cathedral would have never happened. The Candia wouldn't have been disowned from the Concord. It would have been different. They would have had to figure out another way to do that. You know, that was always their goal, but it wouldn't have been this domino effect of Amathar over and over again makes mistakes. And because he is a bad king, bad husband, great dad, Ruby can't blame him. So Ruby doesn't want to be upset with him, and so instead it's upset with Saccharina.
Right. And that thing about Amathar being like the only thing he's really good at is being a good dad, it shows in his relations to Saccharina. But like, he's not, okay, well, I said that he's not like a great dad to Saccharina to begin with, but Lou Wilson is so charismatic, and he gives Saccharina these little tiny breadcrumbs of, like, you know, despite what it might seem like, there is a part of me that might actually care for you. And she's just like, okay, yeah, I get it. I'm on board. And I think that's so relatable.
There's a scene that I think about a lot, mostly because I once got an argument about it in the Dropout Discord. But in the battle to save Jorn Jawbreaker, Ruby says something about Saccharina. I can't pull it off the top of my head right now, but essentially she's like insulting her. And Amathar and Liam are like, yeah. And Saccharina's like, what is happening? And Amathar's like, well, that's my daughter too. And I think that really is indicative of this whole issue with Saccharina and Ruby, and Amathar being in the middle there, is that he does support Saccharina. He's like, wait, good hit, good job. And, you know, he's really trying to love her despite the fact that he feels a lot of guilt over her existence, not knowing about her existence and abandoning Catherine. But also, Ruby is his daughter who is going through a lot, and he's had her for 18 years. He has to continue to support her as well, and it puts him in a really weird situation because everyone's in a really weird situation here.
I think even if you're not in the royal family, a secret daughter from a previous marriage just showing up out of the blue would be a little awkward, but especially in this context where it's like, you know, the whole crown and nobility thing is mixed into it. I don't know if this is the scene you're talking about. I have the transcript pulled up in front of me, but I just saw this quote that stuck out to me. She says, Saccharina says, they just really obviously talk out loud about me as if I'm the mean girl just because I talk this way, but they're behaving like the mean girls. Even my own father is kind of behaving like a catty high schooler. And that is, while watching it, was something that I think I kind of forgot just how, like, offhandedly dismissive so many of the rocks are of Saccharina. Not even in, like, a outwardly malicious way, but just in like a casual dismiss, like, oh, like we don't need to even consider her. You know, she has shown up. She's solved every single one of our problems. She's helping us to the detriment possibly of her own goals, and we're just not even going to talk about it. We're going to completely disregard her. I think Theo is the only person who like actually genuinely takes a minute to be like, thank you so much for coming to rescue Doran, by the way. I know you didn't have to do that.
Yeah, especially because like she and Jorn have been fighting. They've been fighting for, it's implied, I think, years. And she goes and she saves his life. Her thunderstep saves him. There's no way anyone would have gotten to him in time.
She also spares the dying him, which, you know, the thunderstep and both of those spells quite literally save his life.
Yeah, and it's like, I think, eventually Liam gets on her side. But even then, I feel like that was always more Liam going with Theo and thinking that maybe what the poor rocks were doing wasn't the best thing for the kingdom, especially as he moved away from his revenge arc. Then being like, I really like Saccharina.
Yeah, it definitely felt more like, and this is something that I notice with the way Saccharina talks about loyalty as well. Liam's turn towards Saccharina feels more magic related than actual like relationship, like loyalty related. She said Saccharina says that she trusts Theo not because he is this like knight who has this like honor or something, but because she knows he believes in her mission to restore the lost, like, if indigenous lost magic to the land of Candia, and he is just as committed to that mission as she is. That is, you know, when we talk about Ruby and the reaction to Saccharina, I think Ruby is definitely interested in being the like successor to Lazuli, right? It seems like she has this idea of like the inheritance that she is owed, and Saccharina then comes in and is like, I have the knowledge and the power, and you know, you didn't know this, but I was actually Lazuli's favorite. She doesn't say that, but it's like kind of implied. And so then it's this double like punch to the face, because, you know, Jet was also like, I didn't rewatch the first half of Crown of Candy because that would have been a lot. But if I remember correctly, Jet also, independently of Saccharina, has this mission to restore magic to the land. You know, Jet, I think it's like Jet's magical kindergarten or something is the joke that they make. And so, you know, Saccharina being so committed to the same goal while also usurping what Ruby sees as her right, kind of, it makes it so that Saccharina is this fusion of the two twins, but also fully realized in a way that really just seems pointed and like intentionally like rude from the perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know if the part made sense, but
no, it absolutely did, because it very much is. She has parts of Ruby, parts of Jet, and she's going to be queen. Ruby never wanted to be queen. She says this multiple times at the beginning. Jet's like, well, I'm going to be king. I'm going to do all this stuff for Candia. Like, originally, Jet really doesn't want it either, but by the time they're at the tournament, Jet is set on making Candia a better place. So for Saccharina to come in and be like, not only am I connected to magic, connected to Lazuli, I have plans to better this country, and I'm going to be queen.
Yeah, it's so fucking tragic. I rewatching A Crown of Candy, I fully forgot how emotionally heavy it is, because I haven't actually sat down and watched the episodes since probably shortly after they came out. But I started with episode 11, which is then Jet, like the funeral for Jet. And
Yeah.
we talked about the timing earlier, but Jet, the meta level of Jet having died in a role-playing episode, and therefore being absent for Emily being absent from the table for a combat episode for the most part, being introduced then in another role-playing episode, means that even though technically there's like the same amount of airtime, Jet doesn't get the full space to breathe, and like we don't get to mourn Jet's death in the same way that we got to mourn Lupin's death, which makes both for the characters and for the audience the Saccharina just like that much harder of a pill to swallow.
I feel like especially because episode 11 as a roleplay episode is not like traveling on seas. It is, they are running through the woods of Muffinfield, where Calora is from, you know, where everyone hates them and is like spreading lies about them. They don't have time to talk.
Right.
They have, Ruby has her fight with Caramelinda, and Theo has his fight with Caramelinda, and then they're off.
It's just, yeah, it's like they fully just don't get to process their trauma at all. It's sad. Everyone in that funeral scene comes out swinging, and you know it's that classic thing: hurt people, and they're just like everyone's sort of like swinging blindly, and it just, you know, whoever the hits happen to land on. It's rough, but you know you can't necessarily blame them for anything because that is how they're feeling. Just you know, everything kind of. I think the I can't think. I'm drawing a blank for what I want to say, but like, shit's fucked is basically the thesis of the last half of A Crown of Candy. Like, shit's fucked.
Yeah.
People are doing fucked up stuff. Like, but we just got to keep pushing.
Yeah, basically. It's, oh boy.
That, I think, shit's fucked actually brings me to one of the other things I wanted to talk about, which is the destruction of Port Syrup.
Ugh.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same way about it, but I think it's important to talk about just because that is a lot of time, I think, what people who dislike Saccharina or go so far as to say they hate Saccharina, which we don't tolerate hate for Saccharina on this podcast or on either of our personal social medias. So just be mindful of that. But people always point to this event as like proof positive that she is this like bad person, like, you know, willy-nilly kills innocents, when she fully, that was Brennan that did that, not Saccharina or Emily.
It is, so the start of Port Syrup, we got to go a little bit further back. After they kill the Sugar Plum Fairy, Brennan's like, okay, now you guys are going to spend about 3 weeks traveling towards the Cola River. And in that 3 weeks, they talk about how they are liberating towns from crusaders. They're saving people. They're, you know, doing whatever they can. And Brennan's like, hey, your dragon eats hearts, by the way. Which is good. I think Cinnamon's allowed to do that. And so Saccharina's like, well, I can't deny Cinnamon anything. And so is letting Cinnamon kill these crusaders who are doing a bad thing and eat their hearts.
Right.
There is no mention prior to Port Syrup of Saccharina, the Marauders, or Cinnamon ever hurting innocent people just for being Bulbian. They burn Bulbian Bibles, but they don't hurt people that aren't Bulby, I'm pretty sure. I haven't watched it in a while. You just watched it, so if I'm wrong, let me know.
I think there's maybe a like half a scene earlier when they're going to these like different smaller towns where Saccharina explicitly is like, do not go after any of the townspeople. We are here for the Crusaders only. And like she says that to her marauders, which, okay, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but the fact that they are called marauders in the first place, and there's this whole like unexplored like colonial racial aspect to Saccharina's character, I think is very telling. We'll talk about it, but we're talking about something else right now. I felt like, for me personally, I had to mention that before I forgot. But yes,
I'm excited.
She does explicitly say, like, because I think Louis or Swifty or one of the like named marauders is like, no, like the townspeople start running away and they're like, nobody leaves, and then Saccharina goes, like, no, let them leave. We're here for the Crusaders. You know, this is what we're doing. We're here to liberate these people.
Right. Yeah, and so Port Syrup is Saccharina's like, well, I need to do some other stuff, but you can take Cinnamon and go liberate this town. And then Brennan destroys the town. And when everyone role plays truthfully with this having happened, everyone like, then follows it. And it's like, okay, well, Amathar is now very upset. Carmelinda's very upset. Ruby's very upset because the Marauders are murdering people. They burned the cheese man when he was defending the door of the church. Like, these are all bad things. And Saccharina's like, I can't believe the Marauders did that. And she calls them aside and it's like, don't do that again. But the fact that it happened in the first place is baffling. It's not something that she wanted. It's never something that she's wanted.
And we don't, like, for all the talk that we get of the Marauders being marauders, we, up until this point, we don't actually see them do anything like bad. Like, they're a little rough around the edges, obviously, but like, I don't know, every other person sitting at that table has murdered people before. And so for them to, Ruby at one point, I think in the first half of the finale, says like, the people around Saccharina are irredeemably bad. Irredeemably bad. I get maybe why she thinks that, but from like an outside perspective, we don't actually see them do anything other than try and fight for their right to live peacefully, not under the thumb of the Bulbian Church. And, maybe they made a mistake and let a dragon that none of them could probably feel safe controlling. Because that's another aspect to this Port Syrup fight, is that Saccharina sends her giant dragon that ostensibly only listens to her with this group of marauders. So it makes sense that they might not be able, even if they were interested in trying to limit civilian casualties, they probably wouldn't have even been able to control Cinnamon all that well.
I can't recall. Does Saccharina do that on her own, or does Brennan have Gooey ask her to do that?
That's actually a good question. This isn't part of the Port Syrup scene. This is here, but she says, many of you went to the bulb to be saved, but hopefully today you'll remember what really saved you. Such a good line.
Yeah, like she's trying to bring back the magic of Candia. She's not killing Bulbian people. She is just telling you, hey, the Bulbian people are doing this on purpose. They believe that you are inherently evil and need to die. Remember what actually saved you.
Right. Okay, looks like Gooey is the one that initially brings up going to take the Crusaders out of Port Syrup. Oh no, she says there will be many more Bulbian hearts for him. I think we're just going to stick around here and practice some tricks. And then Cinnamon kind of like gives like the puppy dog eyes and is like, oh, please, can I go eat the hearts of the Bulbians in Port Syrup? And then she's like, okay, fine. Because
once again, a Brennan wrong.
Brennan is using Saccharina's weakness of family against her, which, is a good thing to do in terms of the storytelling. Obviously, we're talking about it. We're having like a spirited discussion. But it is like when the audience takes that and then doesn't make the connection that it's just frustrating. I don't even know where I was going with that sentence. It's just frustrating, you know?
Oh yeah, it's like I think that okay. I don't want to get too into Never After because I'll never stop. But
I will also talk about the things I don't like about Never After for a really long time.
but it's also, and I mean, it's also Kipper my beloved girl. I feel like the fandom often has trouble dealing with people who are very clearly being manipulated. And I'm not saying Brennan is as bad as a redacted villain from Fantasy High Junior Year, but like Court Syrup specifically is Brennan saying there's not enough conflict here. Just hating Saccharina isn't enough. I need more to get this PvP that I really, really want. And playing Emily in order to force it. And I think Emily even says, like, I didn't tell them to do that. And he's like, you didn't tell them not to do it. And it's like crazy.
She says that again in the finale. There's a line at the end where it's like, oh, it's after the fight is over, and Brennan is basically like, we're doing the prisoner's dilemma now. Both of you have to decide whether or not you want to act on this information that Amathar is still rightful king of Candia. And Saccharina, and he mentioned something about Louis and John Bon like not being in sight, and Emily goes, wait, I didn't tell them to like act on that. And then he goes like, yeah, but you didn't tell them not to. No. And it's like, that's a crazy thing. That's a crazy thing for maybe it's realistic, but it's still like a bit unfair to
It's a lot punishing. Like you don't here's just to Ruby, hey, you don't see Annabelle right now. Who could say what she's like? That would be wild.
Right? Or like Ruby, you didn't tell Caramelinda explicitly not to murder Saccharina. That's what she's gonna go do right now, actually. And it's like, okay, maybe she would. I could see, this isn't the Caramelinda episode, but I could see her doing that for her own character motivation.
Right.
But that feels like an overstep when you have the PCs there, ostensibly able to make their own decisions.
Yeah. It's frustrating, especially because that is those situations are often what people cite when they're like, I think Saccharina is an awful character. I find her so annoying. I can't believe that anyone likes her. And it's like a lot of the stuff that people are citing are either things that Brennan did or things that Ruby says that aren't actually true.
Yeah. Like, I'm begging people, part of the reason I started this podcast, I'm begging people to watch television with their eyes and ears open and actually like think about what's happening. Because I don't know, maybe it just seems so obvious to me that Saccharina is this deeply broken and like sad person. And Emily says it in an adventuring party, but even just watching the episodes, you can tell that she is constantly putting on this act of nobility and what she thinks is going to get the best reaction out of the Rock's family. And I don't know if we ever actually see a moment where Saccharina is her like quote unquote true self. There's the times when they're like at the called Coronation. At the Coronation, when she like goes off and parties with the Marauders, I think that's the closest we really ever get to seeing who Saccharina is once you strip away all of the outer walls and shells that she's put up to protect herself.
I would say the only other time that I would maybe list with that is when she's told that the Rocks might try and kill her, and she's like, I have been giving my everything to these people, and this is what they're doing to me. But it's, I mean, so like one of the things that people often talk about her. They're like, well, she's trying to come in and make herself a part of the family. I think the like second things that she says to the rocks is, you don't have to treat me like your daughter.
Literally, she makes every effort to keep it all business. But it's Amathar and Ruby that are constantly like, well, it's Amathar that's like, hey, you're my daughter. And it's Ruby that's like, you're never gonna be my sister. And it's like,
yeah,
she never even brought either of those two things up.
Right. She didn't think, and so like then you get to the moment, you can either be my queen or my sister, and she's like, I'm gonna be your queen then, because if this is if you've been treating me like a sister, this is not. I don't want to be here.
Right? I love that fucking line so much. So as part of my preparation for this episode, I was very brave, and I took a trip over to the Dimension 20 Reddit, which don't do, by the way, if you're watching this and you're not on there, do not go over to the Dimension 20 Reddit. It is a bad place. I read truly one post about Saccharina. What I did is I searched Saccharina, and the first post I read, I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm already so tired of reading this. But I forced myself through. I read a couple because I don't really remember a lot of the backlash at the time. I think I do a pretty good job of isolating myself in the sort of a Crown of Candy bubble part of Dimension 20 Twitter. Funnily enough, I think the only time I really get out of that is when people come into your mentions being just so insanely out of pocket that I don't even know where I was going with that.
I was following the thread.
There we go. I think my point was, this is like, I did this because I wanted to talk about the fan reaction to Saccharina, and also how so much of that was directed at Emily in this pretty explicit misogynistic way, I'll come out and say. Because, I mean, one of the things I wrote down from one of the posts I read was, Emily always steals the spotlight by multi-classing. That's a core mechanic of the game.
Yeah. That's the whole game. What?
Also, people kept a lot of what came up a lot is that people felt like Saccharina didn't fit in the pre-established like genre of the world, I guess, because she is the only primary spellcaster, I think. But yeah, this idea that Saccharina is fundamentally incompatible with the world of Game of Thrones is actually ridiculous, because in more ways than one, Saccharina is very much a direct parallel to Daenerys' character from Game of Thrones.
I'm always told this. Everyone is always saying this.
I've never watched Game of Thrones, but this is a little embarrassing. I used to watch the Daenerys video essays that Lindsay Ellis made a lot when those were like first released. So I have like a pretty good understanding of Daenerys' character and the way the narrative sort of fails her. Daenerys, obviously, Mother of Dragons, that's a pretty major one. But she's also, for the majority of the story, has a completely separated adventure where she's going around. She has, at the start of her journey, she is, I think, literally a like concubine or something to Jason Momoa's character. And then she, kills him, I think, and then takes over his place as the leader of this like tribal like group of brown people, basically. And that's like a whole issue in itself. And this isn't a Game of Thrones podcast, so we won't like delve too deep into that. But then the rest of the story for like 5 or 6 seasons is her going around this other continent, building up the followers and the strength to be able to then come back and take over.
She's on another continent?
Yeah. There's Westeros, and then there's like a little, it might not be like a completely other continent, but there's like a sea.
Except like, yeah, I know what Westeros is. That's crazy.
Physically separated, like to the west, I think. By the end of the show, once her and Jon Snow meet up and they actually start their assault, take down the Lannisters, they have her do this wildly out of character thing where she starts burning down the castle, basically. And it's very, that and Port Syrup, I think, are very linked in my mind, because there is this direction with Daenerys' character that the creators of the show wanted to get to, and there is like a logical sort of ABC type of event that could lead to there, but because they wanted to wrap the show up in this season, didn't have enough time to fully explore it, it comes out of nowhere. And there are, it's what, 3 episodes that were cut from A Crown of Candy for some reason. I don't know.
And because of the fire.
The fire marshal came in where they were recording and was like, you can't do this. And so they had to move venues. And
I didn't know that. That was, but so then I think there is a way to connect that, them having to shorten A Crown of Candy by 3 episodes and losing like the Meatlands. Saccharina says she has allies in the Meatlands that we never get to see because the Meatlands set piece was cut. And I think there's a lot more, like Daenerys, there's a lot more that could have been explored with Saccharina's character, specifically with this like corruption arc, quote unquote, if that's where Emily wanted to take it. That they just maybe didn't have the time.
So I don't know anything. I didn't know anything about Game of Thrones. Every now and then I'm like, maybe I should watch some Game of Thrones because then I could know more about A Crown of Candy. But then I don't. But hearing that she's on a separate continent, I now firmly believe that had they not had to cut those episodes, because episode 9 and episode 10 happened in the span of like, I think 3 hours, maybe even less than that. So in another world, the rocks don't run through Muffinfield. They run back to Port Syrup, Port Syrup, and they get back on Annabelle's ship, and they go to the Meatlands, and that's where they find Saccharina. And so now she's had her own adventure far from Candia, and she's coming in, but instead it was this rushed, sloppy thing because they had to cut the episodes. Oh, man.
Now I'm going to daydream about that forever.
Right? And it goes back to the thing we said a while ago about Saccharina's backstory existing in the abstract for the most part. I think there is part of that like daydreaming of just really sitting and thinking like, wow, what other cool things could they have done with this character? They just either didn't have the time or weren't capable of exploring, just like from their real life experience.
Yeah.
So that was like one of the notes that I took with on the D20 Reddit. People were saying that she doesn't fit in this genre. Don't have any idea what the fuck they're talking about because Daenerys and the high magic of Game of Thrones is deeply entrenched in the show. Like Game of Thrones is low magic, quote unquote, but Jon Snow literally gets resurrected at a certain point. He fully dies and then comes back to life. A dragon is killed and then comes back to life as an ice zombie. Like there is wild magical shit that happens in that show. That is, and it's not just swords and traveling and like political drama. It's fantasy, guys. There's also this idea that cinnamon was like meant to be for Liam.
That one is something that I've seen. So it is like prior to Jet dying, Liam has dreams of what he's like. It's Brennan's like, oh, you hear snuffling. It kind of feels like, oh, he's gonna give him like a hog of some kind. But a lot of the description is also a lot of the description that you get for Cinnamon. So it is a kind of thing where it's like it seems like his if Jet had not died, Liam would have been the one to split the party because he would have continued on the route to destruction and the Hungry One and all of that instead of having his peace arc. But I really think that Allie would have gone for the peace arc anyway. It seemed like that's what Allie had always wanted to do.
Yeah. And also, you have those visions early on, and I guess like watching
Right.
week to week, it makes sense that once you get to the episode where you see the cinnamon dragon egg, you're like, oh, that's what these visions were about. But they get entirely recontextualized once Saccharina, quote unquote, gets cinnamon, which also is literally the culmination of her entire life's work. They don't
Yes.
make a big deal out of it, but Saccharina is there only to get cinnamon, basically. There's like these other things, but once they find the bestiary, in the episode before they actually start the Sugar Plum Fairy fight, she sees like the inverted Sugar Plum Fairy rune, and like that's what we're here for.
Yeah. It's a complaint that I kind of got even when I was watching, I watched it live as well. Many deeply embarrassing Squid moments from watching it live. But when especially like I don't even watch Game of Thrones, and I was like, I know the Mother of Dragons. I know that Saccharina is supposed to mirror that character. Of course she gets the dragon. And even then, by the time they get to, because they save Jorah and Jawbreaker, that's when Liam starts changing. They wouldn't have. There's no, in my opinion, there is not a universe where Liam gets to the Sugar Plum Fairy fight and still just wants to kill.
It's also comes back to this idea that like, okay, we're gonna get a little pretentious and like big picture-y for a second.
I love that.
But there is this idea that like, oh, Brennan was going to give cinnamon to Liam. It was promised to Liam, and then Saccharina getting it instead is seen as this like some sort of betrayal, because why does the man automatically get ownership over this powerful magical weapon? There's foreshadowing or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was ever promised to him. I think the core of that emotional response to Saccharina getting the dragon and feeling like, oh, this dragon belonged to Liam and Emily just like snatched it out from under him. And it's like, no, that's actually not what happened. You just think that a woman getting something instead of the man that you thought was going to get it is like the worst crime in the world. And that's simply not the case.
Yes.
I mean, we talk, so bringing up Emily specifically, I watch another D&D podcast. I listen to another D&D podcast. And in it, there's a point in time specifically in the third campaign.
Woo! Look at the baby.
I have Pawpaw and Bookfar up here too, but Saul is just the easiest one to grab. But anyway, you were...
Yeah, so in campaign 3, there's a moment, which you probably know, where Murph makes a spell for Emily. It's a spell that's very, very powerful, and he makes it for Emily. And so many people complain about it that she has him nerf it. And it's like this happens to her over and over again, where DMs will do things for her or give things to her, and instead of being like, oh wow, I'm surprised the DM decided to do this, or really realizing other characters also get super cool stuff. Like I think in that episode, Murph also gave Jake a crazy overpowered thing, and no one mentioned that ever. But it's always, if Emily can do a lot of damage, if Emily gets something cool, people are like, well, I just don't know if Emily needed to have that.
What?
Why is she trying to steal the attention from her other players? Like, she's always trying to, like, usurp the screen time or whatever. That doesn't make any sense.
No, it's so deeply frustrating and so clearly based in misogyny.
And even, like, one of the things I wrote down during the at the end of the Sugar Plum Fairy episode is that everyone at the table is so happy and excited for Emily to be getting this thing, right? They understand that they're making a television show to be watched and that it is a collaborative medium, and sometimes people are going to get things that other people don't. It's just the nature of D&D. But the fans, for some reason, just don't like that.
I mean, even talking just about like the Sugar Plum Fairy episodes and the episode right after it, Liam gets the seed of change, and I've seen people complain about what Liam uses the seed for, but I've never seen anyone be like, Liam shouldn't have gotten that.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, and what I mentioned earlier, that like the visions get like recontextualized. That the moment where he gets like throat grabbed by Lapan and pulled into the whatever, like the Hungry One dimension or something, or this like extra dimensional space in this dragon's lair, it's like, oh, the visions weren't visions of the actual dragon egg, or maybe they were at the beginning, but once Saccharina gets introduced, those change to visions of where Lapan and Preston are. And that feels more like, it would kind of feel like fucked up a little bit maybe if Liam's arc is that his pet dies and then he's sad about it, and then a couple episodes later he gets a new pet. Like, he's happy about that. People do that in real life, obviously, and I'm not here to say that anyone is bad for getting a new pet, but it's not exactly the most satisfying emotional arc for a character to go through. You literally just replace one beloved animal with another one. You know what I mean?
It's very much, once again, like they are making a television show. So.
Let's move on from the D20 Reddit, because I don't feel like talking about it anymore.
So true.
And I mentioned this earlier, but I want to talk about race in A Crown of Candy, specifically with regards to Saccharina's character. So for preparation for this episode, I listened to once I knew I wanted to talk about this, I listened to the race episode of A Podcast of Candy, which...
So true!
Viewers, if you haven't listened to A Podcast of Candy, go do that. There is no universe where this show exists without A Podcast of Candy having come along first. So I just want to make that clear. Go listen to that, especially if you liked all the stuff that we talked about already.
If you want to hear me say like deeply silly stuff about Calroy, listen to the Villains episode. I'm in that one too.
Maybe the our 25th episode of this podcast, we'll make it the Calroy episode. You can have that on.
To me, he's a complicated woman.
Exactly. No, that's the thing. There is an element of A Crown of Candy that is very explicitly about race. And, you know, a lot of the specifically black coding in A Crown of Candy comes from Samir Barrett's art, which obviously the players didn't get, but something I noticed on this rewatch, and that really clicked for me in a way that it hadn't here, is that the Ramseyan doctrine is quite literally just an analog for Christian Zionism. And I think that adds like an entirely new perspective, for me at least, to the season as a whole, but also Saccharina's character specifically, as this like revolutionary figure who is, again, not explicitly, but can very easily be read as mixed race, growing up in the Dairy Islands, which are Irish and Scottish coded, aka very white, in this nunnery as a mixed kid, labeled as a witch or whatever, and then when she finally, takes the power back and starts to defend herself, right, swing back, the group of people that she's with are these like rough mountain people of Candia, are labeled as marauders, and Ruby says they're irredeemably bad, the people around them. And that is, I think, a racist thing for Ruby to say. Not that Siobhan saying that is racist, but that is like, if we're taking the analogy of Candians being black further into the narrative and actually considering what it means for those characters, Saccharina being this is like looked down on by the rich people. There seems to be a level of internalized racism that the Rocks need to deal with a little bit, but also the fan base as a whole for immediately labeling her as bad when she's just trying to like take down the violently oppressive and explicitly racist institution that is the Baldian Church.
So I have so many thoughts on this. So I am the admin of the D20 Person of Color server. And the precursor to that, the D20 Server of Color, that's where I watched A Crown of Candy. I watched it in the D20 live channel there with other people of color, talking to them about what we thought about the episodes as they happened, because Crown of Candy was aired live on YouTube. And so a lot of my immediate thoughts about A Crown of Candy are very filtered through experiences of color, like not just because I'm Black. Most of my experiences with Dimension 20 are always kind of filled through that filter. But definitely, I think there is I've said to people before that I don't think Emily and Siobhan knew they were playing people of color until they were watching the episodes. And that's not their fault. Like that is just, it's the reality of the game. And honestly, it's probably better. It's probably better that they weren't going into it like, I'm playing a Black teenager, you know?
I think there is definitely an element where Emily and Siobhan and Brennan aren't equipped to tell this story in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So, you can't really blame them for that.
Yeah.
I also feel like I should point out at this point, for those that are just listening, I am about as white as a person can be. So just like added context of that, being like, in this discussion, I'm not speaking from personal experience. I'm filtering it through like the academic knowledge and lens that I have learned through analyzing other texts like this.
I feel like, so there's a lot of friction that is also related to race. Like you mentioned Christian Zionism. One of the people in the server of color, Mari, is Palestinian and Argentinian and Colombian, I think. And they have been talking a lot about like A Crown of Candy Candia as an analog for Palestine. And it has been fascinating to hear about and to think about, because they're literally experiencing a crusade, a religious crusade where the goal is extermination. And just in that lens has, so I had always, I've thought about the Bulbian Church, and I've thought about the racial elements of the Rocks being a Black royal family who is being targeted by. Listen, I hate to say that the Vegetarians are white, but unfortunately, Brennan did in fact tell August that Kierden was white. So it's hard for me. Yeah, it's difficult to hear, difficult to feel. But definitely there's an element in there of that. But then specifically thinking about it in that lens has always been very interesting. And in regards to the Marauders, it's I think it definitely, so like you have in the Black community especially, there's a lot of parity based on your proximity to wealth, to prosperity, to whiteness. And so having the Rocks as a rich Black family, the literal ruling family of Candia, and all the Marauders are people who have been failed by the system. All of them are injured. Gui has her whole entire eye melted, you know? And these are all people that have slipped through the cracks in Candia, who have been lost by the system, ignored by the people who are supposed to be protecting them as the rulers of their country. And that has definitely an analog to Black people who pull the ladder up after them and don't like care about or want to help disadvantaged people. And it's, yeah. Oh boy.
Boy.
It's a lot, and I think ultimately, right, it's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate
Yeah.
that as white people, the cat as a majority white cast, they just didn't even think about the races of these characters, even when, like, I for if you're like me and haven't watched A Crown of Candy for a while, and I said the Ramseyan Doctrine. If you don't know what that is, the goal of the Ramseyan Doctrine is to eliminate all the junk food, aka Candia, from the world, so that the hungry one will then eat the world and trigger the apocalypse.
Yes.
So when I say that, when we say that the church is explicitly racist and is a direct analog for Christian Zionism, like, that is, like, it's not even funny or a joke. It's just like, and it's not even subtext. It's literally in the text.
It's literally the text.
That's so much of my my thoughts on while I was preparing for this podcast were, it's just in the text. I don't understand how people like don't see it. It's so much of Saccharina's character, for the amount that is unexplored and exists in this like nebulous, like semi-canon, fanon space. There is a lot that you can get directly from the text that will sort of naturally lead you into that the like more theoretical aspects of her character.
Yeah, I mean, pretty explicitly, Saccharina is a mixed child who is left at a Bulbian or orphanage. Is it run by vegetarians? I can't actually recall if it legitimately is run by vegetarians.
The nun in the flashback scene has a Scottish accent, so I would assume it is like run by Dairy Island people, but
yeah, it's still, regardless, mixed race child, people of different race, you know, like, I don't want to say full-blooded because that's kind of insane, but you know what I mean. And they are targeting her and punishing her for the spirituality of one of her marginalized race. Like, it's explicitly in the text, even if like Emily isn't playing Saccharina as half Black, that's still explicitly racialization in the text. She is half Candian.
She's half Candian, and going like a step further, even the way that her Candian and Dairy parents manifest in her like the like phenotypical features and markers of ice cream, having that be explicitly like visually mark her as different from the people she's growing up around. Probably they don't explore this, but I would imagine probably a source of tension in that environment.
Oh.
And then having the culmination and the like magical treasure trove be at the ice cream temple, I think is also something that isn't explored in the show. But if you think about it for like 2 seconds, you're like, yeah, this girl is finally seeing a representation of herself in this ancient magical text, and it connects both to her race and the like innate magic that she has in her.
Yeah, like it is. You get the temple is called the Ice Cream Temple. She is Neapolitan mint ice cream. It's literally like her fate to kill the Sugar Plum Fairy and save and release Candy is magic. It is in the text. It's like very explicitly clear that like that is not only reasonable but like the only path.
And even when they get to the ice cream temple, Cumulus tries to go first because he's like, I have evasion, I'm a monk, I'll like, even if I set off the traps and I don't make the save, I'll still take half damage. And then Saccharina walks in, and because she has the Winter Scoop and because she is destined to be the one to free this lost knowledge, all the traps unlock, like the door unlocks for her, all the traps shut down as she's walking through. It's like, yeah, that it is very clearly supposed to be that this is where she's meant to be. This is the culmination of her life's work and is thematically consistent for so many aspects of her character. And so for then fans to be like, oh, she didn't deserve, she's like taking up attention. It's like, no, she's not. I
think it is part of that is about her nebulous backstory, right? Because the Ice Cream Temple is her literal fate. It's very clear that it's her fate. But because her backstory and all of her is so clouded because the rocks are so mean to her and she can't talk to them about her backstory, it then makes it seem like, oh, well, she just joined. And Ruby did you guys see what Ruby has going on with Jet? Don't you guys feel bad for Ruby? This should be Ruby's thing. And it's like, no, it shouldn't. This thing is Saccharina's.
Right? And they're taking a trip back to the Reddit. We're not going to be here for too long, don't worry. But I saw on there that one of the issues people had is that Saccharina was quote unquote taking over the storylines for Ruby and Amathar and the Rocks family. And I think there is a difference between like usurping someone's storyline and a character being an obstacle to something that a different character wants.
To say that's like deeply incorrect. I've seen people say that before, and it's always baffling. The Rocks do not care about the religion. Even Liam doesn't care about the religion in Candia. The only person that did was Lepan, and he only cared about it because he literally owed her his life. After he died, they don't think any more about religion. They don't think any more about the magic until even with Cumulus, like Cumulus is like, this was Lazuli's plan. They don't even really engage with that because they don't really care. She's not usurping their roles by being, I hate the Sugar Plum Fairy. We need to stop the Bulbians specifically. Because the Rocks, I'm not going to say the Rocks don't care about the Crusade happening because I can't say that, and I hope that it's not true. But very clearly, when they're leaving Castle Candy, the Rocks are not, their goal is not like, okay, well, what are these Bulbians that are coming in going to do to our people? It is, we need to get our castle back. So, like, Saccharina is doing stuff that honestly they didn't care about.
Exactly. And I think Emily says this in an adventuring party. She mentions that, like, before the Sugar Plum Fairy fight, Ruby and Saccharina are already done, like, on a personal level. But because Emily and Siobhan are real life friends and they're both players at the table, that is the reason why Saccharina takes Ruby along to the Ice Cream Temple in the first place. And that's also the reason that even Ruby herself goes. Not because she wants to, but because Siobhan knows that she can't just disappear for a combat episode because Ruby is being a petulant child, which she has every right to do, but it doesn't make for a good story.
A world where Dimension 20 is instead a podcast, Amathar, Ruby, and Liam go save Joran while Cumulus, Theo, and Saccharina go to the ice cream temple.
Yeah. And in that world, their like split dynamic is even further enforced because of the physical separation, and then it's maybe a little bit more it feels maybe a little more justified, the clannishness later in the finale.
Yeah.
Let's see if I have any other notes that I wanted to specifically call out.
I think the only other thing I would want to talk about is in the adventuring party, Emily's reaction to seeing the episodes for the first time.
Yeah.
Because I think she talks about it a couple times, her and Murph both, about how they're like, they put evil music over me. The way that they edited Saccharina's stuff is like darkly, like they're painting her as a villain. Because she films it in person, and they film, and I think for every 2 hours of video they release, they probably film around 4. And it's just like her seeing it for the first time, and not only watching fan reactions, because I think I'm trying to remember if they explicitly mention reading the chat, but I think she does, at least at the beginning. But either way, she's seeing fan reactions because near the end of A Crown of Candy, she puts on, people are like, oh, we should do something about, like, for Saccharina, about how we should like her. And she tweets, like, I feel very shy about this character, and I do not want you guys to do that. So she definitely was seeing what fans were saying, especially because Murph and Emily are so old. Their main social media they check is Reddit. Like, Murph talks about this in NADPOD, and it drives me crazy insane.
Because I knew that Saccharina haters basically ran Emily off Twitter while A Crown of Candy was airing, but I didn't realize that they were mainly like D20 Reddit people. That's deeply upsetting.
Because when they don't use Twitter, and they've started using Instagram more, but when Murph talks about the fandom in NADPOD, and when Emily talks about the fandom in NADPOD, they are either talking about people on their Patreon, which, first of all, why are people on their Patreon being mean to them? You pay for this podcast. Yeah, or they're talking about Reddit, and it's like, and every time they do, I want to shake Murph and be like, get off of Reddit, stop being on there,
go to the Discord.
But so definitely I felt, even while watching it, even if I hadn't liked Saccharina, I think that I would have been more inclined to her watching those adventuring parties, because I don't like to psychoanalyze the Dimension 20 cast, because that way lies madness, but
it's just like a weird thing to do.
Yeah, it felt like Emily was less than happy with the way that not only fans were interacting with her and like the bad faith interpretations fans gave Saccharina, but also with the way that Dimension 20 had been edited to make Saccharina and the eventual PvP work for fans viewing.
And I think there is obviously with any actual play show, but I think, again, not to psychoanalyze, I think Emily Axford experiences, just in general, a lot of character bleed. You see that when it's Emily that's crying during these episodes, not necessarily Saccharina. And having that, feeling so close to this character you're playing, and then honestly, I don't know how she feels, obviously, but it would feel kind of like a betrayal to have not only the show paint this character through music and editing to be a villain, but also for the fans to then attack Saccharina, but also her explicitly. I
mean, A Crown of Candy is why, I don't know if it's still banned. The word bitch was banned on Dropout Discord because of A Crown of Candy.
Oh, yeah. Saccharina is a bitch, but I love her.
Yes, it's her right. She in fact should be worse. She should be meaner.
I want Saccharina to be more mean. That's my one critique. If
That's
what I should have.
Emily Axford, if you
No.
took anything away from this episode, it's that next time you play Saccharina in the A Crown of Candy sequel season, DM'd by Brennan, okay, you need to be more mean.
Yeah.
Oh
And
boy.
that's all I'm going to say about the Rabbiting War.
I can't get into this. My mentions were crazy.
We'll stop that. I did want to say, because we've been talking about the adventuring parties, and rewatching the adventuring parties for the Crown of Candy honestly kind of made me a little sad, especially after watching the adventuring party for episode 17 of junior year. You're not there yet, obviously. I don't know if you watched that adventuring party.
I know all about. I don't know. I don't watch adventuring parties anymore, probably because of what you're about. I think you'll hit it. Why I don't.
But they mention in that adventuring party that everything from episode 13 to 17 of Fantasy High Junior Year was filmed in 36 hours. And there is a different vibe to modern filmed right after the episode adventuring parties than this older style of actually rewatching the episodes, and it's not even a thing about like, oh, taking fan questions and like asking or like answering them. To me, I think the fundamental difference is more that the performers don't have the space to be able to think critically about the show that they've just finished filming. They haven't seen the final product yet, and so they don't really know. They don't have the perspective on it to be able to talk about it in the same way. And it just makes me sad, because I don't know if the Dimension 20 fandom and adventuring parties will ever be like it was during A Crown of Candy and TUC2, because I think partially because of the quote unquote fan reaction to Saccharina.
Yeah. I don't watch adventuring parties anymore because, well, I stopped watching them during A Court of Fame Flowers because I was being mean. I didn't like that they were saying stuff in the adventuring parties that they didn't say in canon, and then it was affecting canon, which is a symptom of recording them right after the episodes, because they wouldn't have had the space to do that if they didn't record them immediately after recording the episode. But it's really, I feel like they don't get into the episodes, and they really can't, because they're not rewatching them and they don't know where the story's going in the end. They were able to really engage with the media of A Crown of Candy and think about like their choices and what their choices led to, even if they weren't spoiling them, because they knew where the end point of the story was.
Exactly. And oh gosh, that is something that Brennan says in the Crown of Candy adventuring parties that he learned not to do as a result of A Crown of Candy. The whole thing with Annabelle being a lesbian, with Caramelinda being black, and only like that being revealed, quote unquote, when Lou saw her mini. It's not the exact same thing, but it is similar enough where I'm like, you should probably know that this is not the best way to do this. Like, you should just mention it in the episodes that everyone for sure is going to watch.
It was, I now that we are further away from it, because I really did like A Court of Fame Flowers, I'm more sympathetic to it, because A Court of Fame Flowers as an emotional season where there's a lot of courting and a lot of like, you don't get to see the interiority of the characters, but that's a very important part because it's about romance. It makes sense to me that they were talking about the romance and then they were just doing stuff based on what they had talked about, because that's how they're developing their characters in the adventuring parties. But it was definitely frustrating, especially for someone who did like Rue and Hob as separate characters, but was baffled by people claiming they had so much chemistry, because I was like, I don't really see it, because a lot of it happens in the adventuring parties.
And listen, hey, I love Brennan and Oscar Montoya. Great, they have a lot of chemistry. But I do get that, where it's like I'm not necessarily seeing this and so it doesn't click as much. Unless you have anything else that's really pressing, that's all the talking points tonight.
I want to make sure I plug the Saccharina zine before.
I was literally about to ask if there's anything that you wanted to plug before we.
Yes. So I am Squidias on Twitter. That's Squidias. I'm Squidbats on AO3. There's a link on my Twitter. You got to find it yourself. And I ran a couple years ago, I think almost 3 now, a Saccharina zine that was just about Saccharina Frostwhip. It's called La Sucrosia. It's on itch on saccharinazine.itch.io. I am currently about to start running a Ruby zine. That's on Twitter at Ruby Rocks Zine. The applications aren't out while we're recording, but I intend to put them out either today or tomorrow. And who knows how long they'll run? It's a mystery even to me.
So the application should be up by the time this episode airs. So if you're interested in, is it mostly a visual, or is it like? Because I know the La Sucrosia zine, you wrote like a small like fiction part for the end, but it is mostly visual.
Well, that was also because we had a couple of writers and they had dropped out. But I do want to get a couple of writers in. But the difference is that La Sucrosia is a free zine that I released only digitally. I want to make the Ruby Rock zine a physical one. With merch and everything. So I have to think a lot about how many contributors I can have and what kind and what the page limits are. So I do want to have writers in it. I write almost exclusively. I don't post anything that I draw. So my print of interaction is all writing. And I like to make sure there are spaces for writers in creative projects like this. You know.
I love whenever someone specifically carves out a space for that. Speaking of zines that had physical merch at one point. You can't get it now, obviously, but I wanted to plug the A Crown of Candy cookbook. Right now, they're doing digital sales for Easton's for Gaza. I believe that's still going on.
Yes, it is. I'm not sure if Eames and Sam, who are Sam Kindlestuck and Eames Miss Megalodon, who are the main runners of the Calorum cookbook, if they're ever going to stop doing that. But yes, it is definitely still running. There's some wait time between if you buy the sim and then you email them if you get one because, they're busy people. But it is definitely still ongoing.
And if you have no interest in A Crown of Candy or cooking, but you still made it to the end of this video, consider donating to the PCRF. Great charity. They distribute medical supplies and humanitarian aid in Gaza.
Now we're talking about this because it's going to cloud in my mind. Dimension 20 Artists for Palestine is another thing. If you don't care about a crowd of candy, but you still somehow listen to this whole thing, but you really would like some of the artists in the Dimension 20 fandom who are absolutely fantastic to draw you a piece of art. If you go to I think they have a Tumblr too, but I only know about Twitter, at D20AFP, you can look at their list. Donate to Doctors Without Borders for the assigned amount of money for an artist who has free commission slots, and you get a commission from many, many popular and extremely good artists in the fandom. There is probably, this will also be up by the time this episode comes out. I'm currently working with a couple different people on making a D20 Writers for Palestine thing happen.
There we go.
So, we'll fingers crossed, we'll have that up by the time this comes out. But yeah, there's a lot going on in the fandom to organize for Palestine, organize for justice.
I will link all of the things that we have said in the video description. It'll also be on the podcast's Twitter. I'll make sure to retweet some of those like informational things. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Complex Women Pod, or if you just really like my voice and my like takes and think I'm like sexy and like talented or whatever, you can follow me on YouTube and Twitter and pretty much anywhere else at Andrew D. That's the at symbol, then the word at Andrew D. Squid, thank you so much for being here. This was such a pleasure. I had so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
I think we made a banger of a first episode, and I am very excited to see where else this show goes.
Yeah, I can't wait to see all the episodes.
And stay tuned. I've got some really awesome guests lined up. Right, we maybe started with the best one for the first episode, but there is some exciting stuff coming along the pipeline.
Definitely got that I'm more excited for than me. So,
with all that having been said, that is the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.